Welcome to day 139 on the trail. We have 4 readings for today from John 18, verses 1 through 24, Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 29 through 14:21, the 121st Psalm, and 1 Maccabees chapter 10, verses 18 through 50. In 1 Maccabees, we continue with the quest of Alexander to usurp the throne of the Seleucid ruler Demetrius. Both rulers are extending offers of peace and gifts to Jonathan in an effort to form an alliance. As we said before, neither Alexander nor Demetrius are truly interested in peace. Their overtures of friendship are simply based on self-interest and their quest for power and control. Jonathan and the Jewish people are simply a means to achieve their political goals. Alexander is the first to make an attempt to form an alliance with Jonathan by offering him the role of high priest of the Jewish people, which had been vacant since the death of Alchemist. Jonathan accepts the appointment and formally assumes the role by donning the sacred vestments during the Feast of Tabernacles in October of 152 BC. Now there are a couple of important questions here. Why is a Seleucid king, a Gentile, appointing the role of high priest to the Jewish people? Obviously, for Alexander, this is simply a political maneuver to gain Jonathan's support. However, for Jonathan, this appointment would have been a challenge to Jewish law. While according to 1 Maccabees chapter 2, Jonathan was a descendant of a priestly family, he was not part of the line that could become high priest. This led to internal opposition by certain groups in the Jewish community. Some scholars believe that this action by Jonathan may have led to the creation of the Qumran community, who moved into the wilderness to disassociate themselves with what they believed was political corruption coming from Jerusalem. Now, when Demetrius learns of Alexander's appointment of Jonathan to high priest, he also sends a letter to Jonathan with promises of exemption from taxes, release of Jewish captives, assurances of religious freedom, annexation of new territories, and even subsidies to rebuild Jerusalem. However, despite Demetrius' offering being far more generous and expansive, Jonathan distrusts Demetrius based on his previous actions against the Jewish people, and therefore he sides with Alexander. This proves to be an expedient move for Jonathan, as Alexander defeats Demetrius in battle in 150 BC. The Maccabean Revolt, which started as a movement against Gentile oppression of the Jewish faith and religious practices, now seems to be compromising itself with the Seleucids for political expediency. We now turn to John's Gospel. John's record of the events that occurred in Gethsemane differs significantly from the Synoptic Gospels, that is, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. For example, we have no record of the disciples sleeping while Jesus prayed in Gethsemane, or of Jesus' prayer to the Father itself. Instead, John moves quickly from Jesus' arrival in the garden to the appearance of Judas and a band of soldiers, including Roman soldiers, sent from the chief priest and the Pharisees to arrest Jesus. Instead, John adds a passage that connects directly to several of the I am statements that Jesus makes earlier in the Gospel. So in John 18, beginning in verse 4, then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you're looking for me, let these men go." Once again, Jesus uses the phrase ego eimi, I am, which connects directly to the name of God given in Exodus, Yahweh. At this, the soldiers sent to arrest Jesus fell to the ground, While it is unclear, the use of the divine name may be the reason that the group with Judas fell to the ground. But it does appear that John is highlighting the historical importance of this moment. The world, both Jews and Gentiles, are standing before the Son of God to arrest him. Continuing now in verse 10. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back in its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that my Father has given me?" In all four Gospels, we have an account of a disciple cutting off the ear of a servant of the high priest. However, John attributes this action to Peter and also identifies the servant's name, Malchus. Once again, the reason John chooses to include these details is not clear. But Jesus' response to Peter, "Am I not going to drink the cup that my Father has given me?" is similar to Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. For example, from Matthew 26, verse 39, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Jesus is then bound and taken to Annas, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest. John is also the only gospel writer to include this detail. For Jesus to be taken to Annas is not surprising. Annas had been the high priest from AD 6 to 15, and therefore was extremely influential among the Jewish leadership. During this trial before Annas, Jesus tells those gathered that he has spoken and taught publicly. Therefore, instead of questioning Jesus in secret, they can ask anyone what Jesus had said openly before everyone. The contrast here is clear. Jesus has proclaimed his message in public, and they are conducting this trial in secret. The implication is that they are attempting to hide the truth. At this response, Jesus is struck in the face by a guard standing nearby. Verse 22. "Is this how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Jesus is denying that he has acted in secret or conducted any subversive activity among the people. Therefore, he demands that they produce a witness to prove their charges in open court. The court is acting unjustly, and Jesus exposes their hypocrisy. Therefore, Annas quickly brings his examination to an end and sends Jesus, bound, to Caiaphas. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.